Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the podcast and the YouTube channel. XFL Week 1, final thoughts. And let me do a little bit of a disclaimer here because there's 250 or so of you that maybe you're rewatching, already probably watched this video. And I shot a video earlier today, a couple hours it was up, on the final thoughts. I shot it actually last night. I'm recording this now Thursday afternoon. I shot it around Wednesday evening or so, scheduled to go out Thursday morning. And we get 2 to 3 depth charts officially releasing. And on those depth charts, there was some very surprising news as opposed to the video if you did see it earlier, and especially earlier in the week. And this news is going to shake up a lot of things. And it's very scary for week 1 because we still have 4 or 5 or so official depth charts we're waiting on. And based on all of the shuffling from these first depth charts that are quote unquote unofficial / official, there's a lot that's going to be changing. So I just want to make it very clear that by the time you're watching this, 1 or 2 of probably not the quarterbacks, but running backs, more than likely wide receivers, the biggest position. Some of those starters are guys I have a lot of interest in, might not end up being starters. Some guys that I currently have no interest in because as of right now, there's not a lot of buzz. We haven't heard much about them, not much of really depth chart threats for being a starter. Maybe somebody's named a starter or a number 1 receiver that we weren't expecting in the low price range like we did get a lot of recently from the first couple of depth charts. All those updates will be on Patreon throughout the week. If you want to check it out over there, I do have a Patreon with exclusive content and a bunch of different sports. I'm an independent content creator. If this is your first time meeting me, I imagine we'll get a little bit of a newer crowd with the XFL stuff. Feel free to hit that subscribe button. I greatly do appreciate that. Drop down in the comments and let me know, hey, is this your first time here or what you want to see more from the XFL stuff? But there's going to be continuous updates over on Patreon. And the biggest thing, Saturday morning or Saturday around 10 a.m. or so, before these games kick off, before the 4-game slate starts for DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever it might be, I will be going live for an hour like I usually would do for the NFL. Occasionally we'll be doing and have done once or twice already for the NBA. So make sure to check into that live stream. That'll be all of the depth charts hopefully out by then. We've got about 50% or so of the depth charts out as I record this, so just keep that in mind. I will try and post up down below. I will try to post a pinned tweet, or not a pinned tweet, but also on my Twitter. I've been posting and updating about depth charts, so make sure to follow me there. But I'll try and pin up a comment to this YouTube video. If you're listening on the podcast, you can check out the YouTube video or my Twitter to give you any updates on maybe some players I had as yeses that now you shouldn't play at all. A couple of guys that I'll hit on throughout the show. That was the case. I had some 3-4 guys as yeses, and I was high on them. Then the depth charts released, and they're now listed as the 4th and 5th receivers instead of starters. And it was a running back that I had a lot of interest in, and now he's not even on the depth chart for most likely injury reasons, but we weren't really told why. So it's the wild, wild west right now in the XFL, mainly because it's the week before week 1. A lot of the stuff will get sorted out as we see players play on the field, and then we'll have a better scope of it moving forward. So buckle up. It's going to be a ton of value plays that are really going to be starters now. It's going to be a ton of people, just whoever has the best information is going to win. I aim to give you the best information here, but just know that if you're watching this on Friday night or Saturday morning, that you want to check in on my Twitter, you want to check in over on Patreon, and definitely on Saturday morning stream to get the most up-to-date news. But as of right now, I'm going to give you what we have as of the information that I have currently on the East Coast at 12:45 p.m. East Coast time. That's a lot of a disclaimer at the front, but if you are here, welcome. My name is Sal Vetcher. Like I said, you might be new. If you hit the subscribe button, I greatly appreciate that. I do have a Patreon with exclusive content for NBA, PGA, and the XFL right now in season are those sports, so you can go ahead and check that out if you are indeed interested in signing up there. The Patrons, your content will be a closing thoughts podcast tomorrow, Tuesday recap show the previous week, and then updated tiers and rankings for every single position, so quarterback, running back, wide receiver, for the DraftKings slate, where I have the most interest in. For this first week, it's going to be mainly going off of depth charts, reading a ton of news, very similar to the NFL preseason, 2 to 3, 4, 5 hours of news a day, trying to consume as much as I possibly can. And then after that, just being able to make a rankings off of that, taking into account these players' skills and the offenses that they're in and the coaching staff behind them. So with that said, if you could hit the subscribe button on the audio version, how those ears doing, and also here on the YouTube channel, I greatly appreciate it. And also, if you're still watching this on Thursday or Friday, be sure to check out my pinned tweet. You can enter a contest there, doing one with FantasyDraft, pretty cool contest giveaway. So the biggest change, or not the biggest, but one of the biggest, maybe the biggest change from the previous video, Phillip Walker, like an hour or 2 hours after I recorded the video, was named the starter over Connor Cook. This was a surprise. It was reported that Connor Cook, pretty much for the training camps, the preseasons, that he was likely, one, the bigger name, Phillip Walker was the assigned quarterback. Each team got an assigned quarterback before the draft. And Phillip Walker is somebody who's fun to watch. Racked up a ton of yardage just both on the ground and with his arm. Very exciting player in college. And now he's going to have a chance to be in this June Jones air raid offense where they don't have any tight ends. They're going to go 4 wide and they're going to chuck the ball everywhere. And the biggest thing that's really impactful is you're going to be in likely the best offense or one of the best 2, Dallas and Houston, profiling out as what seems like the best offenses both in Texas to start the year, but the best quarterback-friendly offense with your coaching staff behind you, and now you're the starter at a cheap price point late in the week named the starter, so a lot of people might not really gravitate towards Phillip Walker as quickly. I was arguing, and I have rankings up now actually, so right here, I was arguing with myself earlier in the original video if I would make Phillip Rivers sort of a quarterback one this, or Phillip Walker, a quarterback one this week, even though we don't really know what to expect. And I think the answer is yes. So I ended up putting Phillip Walker above Cardale Jones and Matt McGloin. Those are my 3 yeses at quarterback so far this week, based on the news we have. And that's the rankings. Walker, Jones, and Matt McGloin for me. Walker, it's just a price point 1. It's the upside of this offense when you factor in probably the best receiving corps overall, at least on paper, heading into it. The coaching staff behind him. The price point in the midweek switch or surprising sort of quarterback name of him. He's going to be my number 1 quarterback as of right now, Thursday afternoon. Cardale Jones will be number 2. A steep price to pay, but you're going to have a ton of money left over because you'll see it's going to be like half the starting wide receivers this week on the outside, even in the slot, are going to be in the $3K range, it seems. So a lot of those guys are going to give you value. Some of the running backs that are really good this week that I find really appealing are in the $6K range. Even in the $7K range, it's still fine when you have those cheap wide receivers. So it's pretty easy to get up to a very sustainable quarterback. Now, the thing with Cardale Jones in the offense for DC is they're pretty decent-sized favorites in this one. So I think he's the best quarterback. I think he has by far the best arm in the XFL, maybe the most versatile, but if not the most versatile, a very versatile quarterback. They traded Trey McBride, who now is not on this team anymore, but is now not even going to be starting, and we'll talk about that, for Rashad Ross, which is a perfect fit for Cardale Jones, getting him from the AAF, but there's now murmurs over the last 2 or 3 days or so that Rashad Ross might not even be a starter on this team, so the XFL already getting pretty wild, I would say. So no news yet on Rashad Ross. I actually bumped him down in the wide receiver rankings. He was in my top 10. Now he's right around the top 10 or outside of it. At the price point, it's easy to pass up on, especially with these question marks. So Cardale Jones wide receivers, if anything, are a little bit murky right now. We'll go through some of them that I think offer a lot of value if indeed some of these rumors are true. But his coach is Andrew Luck's former coach at the Indianapolis Colts, so that's good to see as well. They don't profile out exactly the same, but similar build quarterbacks. That's the type of upside that you're looking for when it comes to coaching. Matt McGloin's my number 3 quarterback, and I think he can go very under the radar. Against this very same Tampa Bay defense in the preseason, he had a couple of picks, but he threw 3 touchdown passes. He has a smaller offensive line, which isn't great, but he's one of the more experienced quarterbacks in the league. Former Penn State Nittany Lion was fine there, one of their best quarterback options, really, during his time before Trace McSorley came, maybe even one of the top 3 best quarterback options there, top 2. And then he went to Oakland, started, I believe, a Thanksgiving game in the NFL. So he has experience. His wide receivers are injured. I mean, their number 1 overall pick was, I believe, Yancey out of LSU. He was a former Packers draft pick, really didn't cement into anything or develop into anything with the Packers, really just a preseason guy, depth chart, and then was out of the NFL. This team has a lot of running backs, and they're going to likely be a mixture of run-heavy, especially with these injuries to wide receivers. So their running backs coach and their offensive coordinator are very run-focused. In the past, they've had a running back coach who, for the Giants, had 2 1,000-yard rushers in 2005. So do keep an eye on Matt McGloin. I think he's very interesting at this price point. I think he has the most upside and potential based on his just experience and the offense that he has around him. Week 1 just might be a tough week to kind of pinpoint that. And then 2 of my other quarterbacks that I like, Erin Murray, if you remember, in Georgia, he had a great career in college. He's facing a very good defensive back unit in New York. I would say the best in the league, one of the 2 best in the league at worst. He's cemented in as the quarterback. He has some mobility. They lost Antonio Callaway about a week ago, so that's a big knock. Former Cleveland Brown, dealing with injuries, suspensions, personal problems for pretty much his past year and a half trying to get into the NFL. The defense does scare me here, so that's why I have him a little bit lower. They did stonewall Erin Murray in this Tampa Bay Vipers offense in the preseason game. And then Jordan Ta'amu is very interesting to me. I have him as 5th behind Murray. You can argue with me that you could put him 4th. You could argue with me that you would put him 6th or 7th. So Ta'amu is interesting because he won the quarterback battle late in the season and really very recently against Taylor Heinicke, a former NFL backup quarterback. He started for the Panthers before, filling in for Cam Newton and some other injuries. But you have a spot where Jordan Ta'amu is mobile. He's going to go up against an undersized defensive line, so that helps his mobility and ability to just find receivers. He's inexperienced out of Ole Miss. This is probably like an NFL stepping stone for him if he can do well here. He has strong backups behind him, so that makes him a little bit more risky if he does struggle during the game. So it's interesting because you might see a run-heavy approach here. The problem there is if they get down big early, which Vegas is projecting right now, and we don't know how much to trust Vegas with these lines early in the week, but if that's the case, he might be forced to throw. Maybe somewhat of a sleeper, but with Phillip Walker now opening up for just so much cheaper and a better offense, it's hard to want to get there. So once again, my quarterbacks rankings right now are Phillip Walker, Cardale Jones, Matt McGloin, Erin Murray, and Jordan Ta'amu. I will point out that Josh Johnson and Landry Jones are both 50-50 game times decisions. Two of the best quarterbacks, or at least on paper, high profile, marketable quarterbacks in this league. Josh Johnson at 10,700. Seems like he's leaning not to play based on the reports that came out yesterday. I don't have much interest in him at that price point anyways. Landry Jones at 9,200 I would have a good amount of interest in, so keep an eye on him. He said he's going to try and practice and play this week. We haven't really seen much of that as of Thursday. I would expect both of these guys not to play, which is not a good look for the XFL in week one, but at least it's happening in week one where people are already hyped about it. I think the XFL's marketing team has actually done a very good job. Now, I don't really have any interest in BJ Daniels, who beat out, I believe, Brandon Silvers in Seattle. Philip Nelson would start for Landry Jones at 8,300. I would just still prefer Phillip Walker, a backup who's cheaper and a better offense. You do have, in some situations, very interesting backup quarterbacks, like Taylor Heineke we talked about, Tyree Jackson behind Cardale Jones, but that's something that we'll look at later in the season if there's any QB question marks. Right now, this is where I'm at with quarterback. Again, be sure to check the pin comment and my Twitter for anything that does change. Getting into running backs now, and I'll point out the biggest thing for running backs that was brought up at least recently. Lance Dunbar was not on the depth chart, somebody that I hyped up, and a lot of people have been hyping up if just in NFL talent, and a lot of people have been hyped up, would be just former Cowboy, good pass catching role. He did say that he was injured, and there was reports that he was injured, but was going to play this week, not on the depth chart. Now, the depth chart, I should point out there for you that the depth chart for this team in Dallas right now was one that the Renegades was one that wasn't officially reported by the team, but there was a couple other XFL reporters that said this is the official depth chart as of February 3rd, and he was not on it. He was not even listed as the running back 3. They just had 2 running backs, and obviously Cameron Artis-Payne and then Young behind him. No Lance Dunbar, so very interesting. Maybe it was a blunder. We'll see moving forward. Maybe it's injury related. I don't know at this point. We have not gotten any clarity, but I've taken him out of my rankings. He was somebody who was in my top 10 in running back rankings. Now he has dropped out of the top 15. So this is my best effort to rank as of Thursday afternoon, where we only have half the depth charts, to rank the top 15 running backs. Again, one of these running backs can be ruled out because of injury. We haven't gotten much good injury reporting news yet for week 1. Another one of these running backs could be ruled out because they dropped from number 2 to number 4 in the depth chart, or number 1 to number 2 or 3 in the depth chart, and then they're not clearly a top 10 interest, right? So be sure to check all the things, like I said, Twitter, the Patreon, the pinned up comment down below. I'll try and put as much as I can there. But my number 1 running back is Cameron Artis-Payne. Look, they're 8.5-point favorites. Lance Dunbar not being, or Lance Dunbar not being behind him now for whatever reason on the depth chart also helps him with less experienced guys like Young behind him. Marquise Young, so 6,800 is too cheap. He's my favorite player at the running back position this week as of now. He's a former SEC running back, Panther running back, strong offensive line that they've built in Dallas for him. He might lose some pass catching work. He was never really much of a pass catcher with his short stint in Carolina. In his Auburn days in college was not the greatest of pass catchers either there. But he has some abilities, and with no Lance Dunbar, he's not as likely to come off the field. But with this spread of being an 8.5-point favorite, that does at least Vegas indicating, and again, we don't know how much to trust them, but if I'm going to trust anybody, it might be Vegas to just know and set lines when they win so much money every single month, millions of dollars. Now, they weren't great with the AAF, but that was mainly totals, and you can see they didn't really post any totals this week. I'll take it Cameron Artis-Payne number 1. Here's another one that's interesting. Christian Michael, maybe the best running back in this league, the highest priced guy here. I don't have him as a yes, but I have him as my number 2 overall rank. He's expensive, 1. He's an 8.5-point underdog, 2. I expect high ownership on him. He had 26 career receptions compared to his 256 career NFL carries when he was with both the Packers for a short stint and mainly the Seattle Seahawks. Different offenses that he was in at that time. Seattle more of a run-heavy approach. Packers kind of just not really focusing on the run, so it's hard to really take his stats and his career numbers in the NFL and think how stable they are based on the offense that he was in. In St. Louis, though, they're very much like Seattle, where they want to run the ball all the time. As big underdogs, they might have to get away from that a little bit. So at 8,400, yes, I think he's one of the best options, one of the best players in this league, but I think he's a little bit sketchy. I would not be just The next guy on this list is Elijah Hood in LA. I would not be worried if you wanted to put Elijah Hood as number 2 and Christian Michael as 3, 4, or 5, anywhere down there because of price. I'm trying to factor in price on these lists. Elijah Hood at number 3 for me. He was the number 1 pick for LA. He has by far the biggest O-line and the most dominant O-line in this league, in my opinion. 5.5 point underdog is concerning, but he did catch 25 passes in his junior year, which was his final year before leaving UNC, in just 11 games, so he does have some upside there. He has some other fine backs behind him, but just based on where these, and I'll talk about one that I think has a much better pass-catching role, but is currently, this depth chart did come out and was labeled the 3rd string running back on the team, but he is already Elijah Hood named the starter. That depth chart is already out, so I do feel secure at 7,500. The DC Defenders depth chart is not out, but Donnell Pumphrey and Jarrell Presley aim to be as 7.5 point favorites, 2 of the better running back options this week. I have Pumphrey at number 4 and Presley as number 5 on my rankings. It's mainly a pricing thing. Pumphrey is $2,800 less, and I expect him, again, we don't have the depth chart, but I expect him to be the number 2 running back and Presley to be the number 1 running back. That could honestly mean, especially when you have Pumphrey in a loaded backfield, NCAA all-time rusher. He was the 7th pick in the draft. Presley was the 3rd, so that's why I'm kind of expecting it to go that way. But Pumphrey, you might get 15 carries out of him and 15 out of Presley, and then you're getting a very nice price discount. Even if you get 12 out of Pumphrey and 18 out of Presley, it's a pretty decent price discount of $2,800, so I'll slightly give him the nod. Those are my top 5 running backs: Cameron Artis-Payne, Christian Michael and Elijah Hood, Donnell Pumphrey and Jarrell Presley. Devon Smith in Tampa Bay, he's a 2-point favorite. I don't expect Tampa Bay to focus on running as much, but maybe they lean a little bit more balanced. That depth chart is out for Tampa Bay, one of the 3 that we have, one of the 3 official ones that we have. He is labeled as the starter, so I have him in here as number 6 at a nice price point of $6,300. He's in a loaded backfield, which is the issue, but he's listed as a starter. He had 35 receptions compared to his 361 rushing attempts, over 180 each of his last 2 years in college. He averaged about 4.5 yards per attempt there. He seems like he's just a guy who's going to be a workhorse here. Nothing flashy, just downhill runner. So I have him as number 6 just because of the security of him being the starter. Lawrence Cook in New York, again, I touched on it earlier, 2.5 point underdog here, but New York is expected to be in some sort of committee. Their running backs coach, their offensive coordinator, very run focused. Running backs coach was the Giants running backs coach in 2005 when they had 2 1,000-yard rushers. Lawrence Cook I expect to be one of the top 2 on the depth chart. I'm going to project him to be number 1 on the depth chart, and then Darius Victor number 2. I'm not secure with that. You can get Cook being 2 and Victor 3 and somebody else 1. We do not have the depth chart yet, but based on the pricing, based on what we've been seeing in the preseason and the reports that I've been seeing, that's what it's looking like right now. I have Lawrence Cook as number 7. Kenneth Farrow in a loaded backfield in Seattle. I have a couple of guys in Seattle in my top 11 right now, because I think whichever ones are the 1 and 2 are the guys that you want, especially the guy who's number 1. Kenneth Farrow was the highest drafted player. Again, 7.5 point dogs here is a little bit concerning for his pass catching responsibilities. He only had 22 receptions in his last 2 years in college football compared to 371 attempts. So more of a downhill runner. He has a great offensive line loaded with SEC and Big Ten run movers. He was named a team captain, Farrow, whatever that means for you. I have him as number 8 here. Again, we'll wait the depth chart. If he's number 1 on that depth chart, I'll leave him at 8. If he's number 2 or 3 behind Troi Williams and or Jaquan Gardner, I'll move him down. I have Troi Williams, his teammate, at number 9, so depending on where these guys come in, I'll have more interest. He's only 4,100. Look, was taken 1 pick before Kenneth Farrow in the draft, so he has more draft upside there for the depth chart, depending on where it comes out. 38 receptions in 3 years and on just 204 carries at Texas A&M. He came out of Texas A&M. He's a little bit better of a pass catcher than Kenneth Farrow and a lot cheaper. Keep a very close eye on that depth chart. Darius Victor, I talked about the backup running back, at least how I'm projecting it, in New York behind Lawrence Cook. I have him at number 10. And now we're getting to a range of guys that I think can be very sneaky depending on where they come in on their depth charts or just where the game flow goes. Number 11, I have Jaquan Gardner. Now, he was very good in the AAF. He had a total of around 75 total touches, 12 of those being receptions in 7 games. He made this Seattle team without even having to practice. He was injured, but they just knew that he was that good. So Darius Gardner is also on Seattle's depth chart. He might not even make the team, right? We don't know right now with the news, or might not make the depth chart. He might be injured, who knows, but he could also be the number 2 running back. He was very good in the preseason, but they let everybody play in the preseason, but he had a long touchdown run, a couple of really long 25-plus yard runs. If Jaquan Gardner is listed as the backup or somehow the number 1 running back in this offense for Seattle, that is a spot that I will have a lot of Jaquan Gardner. He is probably their best pass-catching option, and they're expected to be trailing in this one according to Vegas. So I talked about how I like Elijah Hood, and it makes sense. He was drafted number 1 by them. Fantastic option, 7,500. Slight underdog is a concern. Larry Rose is the 3rd running back on the depth chart. This is official for LA. Larry Rose I have as a yes because I think he's a very interesting dart throw if indeed this team gets down by a touchdown or so, like Vegas is projecting. Now, he's number 3 in the depth chart, so maybe I'll move him from a Y to an X. I was hoping he might come in number 2. He was the 5th pick in the draft by LA, though. He caught 133 balls at New Mexico State in 4 years. 55 of those came his senior year. I get it. It's a different type of division and conference in New Mexico, really just a different conference. But again, 55 receptions in a year for a running back is unreal. As a 5.5-point underdog, maybe he gets on the field more and is interesting as a dart throw. Now, I mentioned he's a number 3 running back on his team. Jajuan Harris, who's a former 49ers and Green Bay Packers running back in the NFL, is actually ahead of him at number 2. Jajuan Harris is in his 30s, a little bit older, but he was always an average running back in the NFL, averaging over 4 yards per carry. Didn't really have an opportunity to catch a lot of passes, so I would not be shocked to see Larry Rose, the younger player, jump him in the rotation pretty quickly, if not in this game. So you're going to get a lot more security out of Elijah Hood. I think Larry Rose is an interesting dart throw. Deangelo Henderson as my 13th ranked running back, probably the best option for Houston in their backfield. Andre Williams doesn't really catch passes. This team wants to throw the ball a ton. They don't really have any tight ends. June Jones in his college career only threw the running backs 10% of the time. Deangelo Henderson, probably the best pass catching option at 4,500. Seems a little bit steep, but depending on where he comes in on the depth chart, might be something that you actually want to look at. I don't know why I have this as Jim Jones. It's June, but last couple of options are just dart throws here. Sherman Batty, St. Louis running back. Again, I think Christian Michel is the best option here. Michael, you have Sherman Batty, who's 3,100. He might not make the depth chart, but if you see him as the backup or even the third string, he's very similar to a Larry Rose, where he had a lot of catches. He had 51 receptions in his last 2 years at Tulane, 296 rush attempts. So be sure to keep an eye on where he comes in on the depth chart, if he comes in at all. Could be a sneaky gadget type player. And finally, Quentin Flowers was listed as the quarterback 3 instead of a running back for Tampa, although he is a running back. They're expecting him to be a very gadget-style player. At a price point of $3,900, I don't know if I really want to be playing around with him as a gadget-style player when he's going to get, maybe like 6 carries at best and just attempt a couple of passes. So I'm actually going to make him a no. He's my last ranked player at 15 at the running back position in these rankings as of Thursday afternoon. If you want to play him just for the interest, you can go for it, but I just wanted to point out that he is now listed actually as a quarterback, not a running back. And it could just be a personnel thing to get more bodies and talented players on your depth chart and keep another running back, but just worth at least pointing out in my opinion. Let's go over to wide receiver, which is by far going to be the hardest thing to project on a Thursday, right? So on a Thursday, a lot of this can change. On a Thursday, it can get a little bit interesting and weird. It already has since really Tuesday and Wednesday for wide receiver news. So we'll go through some of it. We'll go through the players that I had a lot of interest in, and now I don't have much interest in at all. We'll go through some of the guys that I have newfound interest in because of the depth charts that have come out, and just some of the more stable players that I think you're going to see this week. So, a couple things now. The biggest thing is to continue, like I said, and this is like the fourth time saying it, continue to watch for updates on my Twitter, wherever it might be. I have a list over there for XFL. Be sure to check in Saturday, the live stream. Do not set your lineups today as you're watching this, or Friday, because depth charts are going to come out and things are going to change. You might end up starting a running back who's not even on the depth chart, like Lance Dunbar. You might end up starting a wide receiver who's now not the starter, but the number 3 or 4, like potentially Rashad Ross. So be sure to watch all of that. So at wide receivers, I think the most stable piece right now, barring any crazy depth chart thing, which I'm not expecting, is that Sammie Coates and Cleo Lewis are going to be the wide receiver 1 and 2 in Houston. Cleo Lewis was actually taken before Sammie Coates in the draft. Sammie Coates has been the most impressive player in camp from all the reports from their coaches and beat writers right now. These guys seem very stable, even with Phillip Walker as their starting quarterback. I'm fine getting to, honestly, both of them, and it's a very good stack in my opinion, and the offense that should look the best. They have no tight ends. Sammie Coates is going to be the deep threat, one of the most experienced players in the league. 9,300 you're paying for, but I think there's a lot of ways to easily get there, especially if you're going to play his quarterback with him, who's very cheap. Cleo Lewis, I expect to be on the other outside at 4,100. He looks like one of the best value plays right now on paper. Now, number 3 changed a lot for me. I had interest in Jads Ferguson. I had interest in Trey McBride. Both of those guys aren't even listed as starters. They're at best 4th or 5th options in their offense, at least on the depth charts, which kind of shocked me based on the hype we've been seeing out of Jads Ferguson in camp. Maybe it's just a depth chart thing and it'll change. Shocked me based on the hype we've seen out of Trey McBride and the fact that he was taken early and then traded for Rashad Ross, and now he's dropped a little bit. So very interesting there for me. So number 3 for me now is actually Deandre Thompkins. And Deandre Thompkins, throughout the week, you saw in the first look video, I like Sammie Cobbs a little bit. Then looking more into it, it seemed like, Deandre Thompkins and Sammie Cobbs might be competing for the wide receiver 2 job on the outside in DC. Now I start to hear some news and look around and read that Rashad Ross has been practicing with some of the second unit. Rashad Ross did not have as much run really in the preseason game as some of these other guys, and did not just really ended up being traded and not being as much of a fit, whatever it might be. At the very worst, Deandre Thompkins looks like he's beating out Sammie Cobbs right now on the outside for the wide receiver 2 job against Seattle. with a fine quarterback throwing him the ball. He's only 4,600. Even if Rashad Ross is the wide receiver 1, I don't want to pay 10-4 for it. So I think you're going to get Deandre Thompkins without a doubt being on the field for a good amount of the time. Again, I'm trying to read between the tea leaves here, but I have him as my number 3 option right now at 4,600. It is sort of a risk. You can get Sammie Cobbs, the bigger body receiver, and I have him listed right now right outside, right around my top 10 in interest, depending on who's listed as the starters. But keep a close eye on the DC Defenders depth chart if it comes out. If Thompkins is listed as a starter, I'll leave him in these top 5. If he's not, well, then move up Sammie Cobbs, move up some of the other guys on this list, Rashad Ross if you would like at that point. LA's depth chart is out, and Nelson Spruce is listed as the number 1 receiver. He profiles as it. He was their 3rd-round pick. At 8,500, I would rather have Sammy Coates, but I think he's pretty secure at that point. Dallas's depth chart is out, and Jeff Badgett is the number 1 receiver. Lots of other things are up in the air with their receivers right now. We talked about the big one being Jazz Ferguson, not listed as a starter. So what you have as the starters for Dallas is Jeff Badgett. In the slot, you have Flynn Nagel, who I actually had interest in before. Happy to see he secured that role right there. Not going to run a lot downfield, but pretty nice if he gets some volume. And then Freddie Martino, who I believe they actually traded for this offseason, and he's listed as a wide receiver too. So at $3,000 flat, you're going to see a lot of wide receivers that potentially have starting upside. He is one of them now, starting in an offense with a solid quarterback, as long, and maybe not this week, but moving forward based on injury. Pam Phillips, wide receiver 3, likely to be in Houston, was taken also somewhat early in the draft, was the number 3 wide receiver taken by Houston. Again, they're going to use a ton of wide receivers. The number 2 wide receiver in the Houston offense, who is probably Cleo Lewis to start, is probably going to be the number 1 in most of these other offenses, which makes Cam Phillips have a lot of upside as a wide receiver 3. T.O. Redding for New York is actually going to be, right now projecting out as to be the number 2 wide receiver. If that's the case, I like him. Keep a close eye on it at 3,200. Yancey is injured, like we said. He was their first pick in the draft. He is hurt. You're probably going to have Mikael McKay start at the wide receiver 1. Again, keep an eye on this, but he projects to be the wide receiver 1. T.O. Redding, reading right now at just 3,200, is projecting to be number 2 as 2.5-point underdogs. Solid QB that you can pair him up with. I do like that. And now guys that I don't have ranked because, look, they can either be guys I have interest in or none at all. Sammie Cobbs, we touched on that. Keep an eye on where he's on the depth chart with Deandre Thompkins. I'll be sure to tweet out all these depth charts and have them finally updated in the rankings. Have them updated in the rankings over on Patreon. Nick Truesdell, he was taken number 1 by Tampa Bay. He's a tight end. He can be very good in this league at 6,900. It's a little bit risky, though, because you don't know what to expect. Is he going to be a dominating tight end? They said they want to use him as a wide receiver, but it's yet to be seen, so keep an eye on him. Reese Horn, Adonis Jennings, Jalen Tolliver. These are all players recently, Horn and Tolliver for Tampa Bay, that were recently named starters. Their price points, $3,400 and $3,200. So crazy how underpriced everybody's going to be as starting wide receivers. Jalen Tolliver for Tampa. Or Adonis Jennings, for Los Angeles right now. Name the starter, $3,300. So insane how cheap these guys are. The starters for LA right now are looking like the main guys on the outside, Nelson Spruce, and then Adonis Jennings. For Tampa Bay, it looks like it's going to be Nick Truesdell at tight end, and then it looks like it's going to be the main other starters, Jalen Tolliver at that point, and then Reese Horn. So just very interesting as these guys are just so cheap. Other guys, Malachi Dupree for DC is also somebody that's name has been floating around next to Deandre Thompkins as the week has gone on, next to Sammie Cobbs, so keep an eye on that. Eli Rogers is probably pretty secure into the slot role with DC, but it depends. We have to wait to see this depth chart. He's very expensive, though, at that price point. Not sure if I like it. Saeed Blacknall, who I had interest in LA, deep down threat receiver, maybe later in the year will become more interesting, but he's not listed as a starter. Really hard to prioritize him at that point. So as I scroll down here, you can see some other guys that at the bottom of this, Keenan Reynolds stands out a little bit. They're saying that he might be more of a gadgety player out there, wide receiver 1. We'll see what the depth chart says. But be sure to just check back with these depth charts. It's going to be very hard because I imagine you'll have somewhere between 6 and 10 starting wide receivers out of the 24 in the league that are going to be like in the 3K range or very close to flat minimum. On here, I already have somewhere around 4 or 5. So choosing between those guys becomes really difficult. So choose the guys who are in good offenses, have good coaching staffs behind them, profile out in a Vegas projection-wise to be throwing more, profile to be in an offense that wants to throw more, or you can just stick with what works right now. I think Cleo Lewis and Sammie Coates are Sammie Coates, Nelson Spruce, Jeff Badgett seem like the most secure pieces that we have as of right now based on the depth charts that are out there. With that said, thank you, everybody, for tuning into this video. Take 2 on this since a lot of news came out. I wanted to make sure we had the most updated video I possibly could while I had the time to. Tomorrow on Patreon, I will have a closing thoughts on Friday, probably around the afternoon or evening, just to make sure we have most of the depth charts out. So be sure to check back in for that one. And then on Saturday, I will come back and be live here. So hit the subscribe button, check out my Patreon if you are indeed interested. We'll start to have some content trickling out tomorrow for the XFL, NBA stuff every single day. Follow me on Twitter to make sure you see the updates. And down below, I will pin up anything in the comments if something changes in a massive way. So no need to try and notify me. I will have it and be on that. So thank you so much. Hit the subscribe button before you go. You all rock. Peace out, gang. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Above my head, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I do ask you if you can please hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a good amount to reach more people. You can also follow me on Twitter. That's over there. Right in the corner is my @SalVetriDFS Twitter. And then above, you'll find my Patreon link. You can click on that if you want more exclusive content for me. Or a video is going to pop up, so why don't you check that one out as well. I think it's going to be beneficial for you. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.